Welcome to this Gerd and Ursula Ulbrich wedding memorial, one of the first that I'm going to be producing, and I hope that you'll enjoy it and learn a little bit about your heritage and come to love them as much as I have. As we can see, they were married on May 2nd in 1953 in Hamburg, Germany. So let's begin. This is a picture of my mother. She was probably somewhere in the age of 14 or 15, so this was a little bit before she actually started dating my father. I thought this was just a really beautiful picture of my mother, and when I look into her eyes in this picture and the face, I see a lot of characteristics of one of my granddaughters, Serena Garcia, and I just see the same sort of look in her. And it's amazing to me to look at some of these pictures and see the similarities in my children and also in my grandchildren. A beautiful picture of Mom is, I think, one of the best that I have. So this is a picture of the Handschule, Handelsschule in Hamburg, where my mother went to business college. It was the Dankers. It was called Dankers, and you can see the signs. Here's Handelsschule. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I guess that means something like a business school, and Dankers is the name of it. And so she started here, apparently, according to her notes on beneath the picture in her album, on the 4th month, which is April 1st, 1941, through sometime in 1942. And at the time, in 1941, she would have been about 16 years of age. And so this is a picture of her at this time when she's going to this Dankers school, and just a beautiful, beautiful young lady. And then this third picture here I included because it's kind of important. This is two friends of hers. So the three girls here, the middle is my mom, and on the left and right of her are the Fischer Schwesters, or Fischer sisters. They are twins, and they were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and befriended my mother in this school, and would have a pretty big influence on the direction of our future family. So they became friends all the way back then, and I just thought I would include that. Now, before meeting my dad, my mom was engaged a short time to a Helmut John. He was Catholic, and my mom realized that this wasn't going to work out. She doesn't explain why, so they broke up. And then while working at an insurance firm, her dearest friends, Gisela and Rita Fischer, introduced her, my mother, to John Huller during a brief visit to Berlin. Not sure what the visit was all about, or maybe it was just to go and visit with John Huller. Anyway, John was a soldier, a German soldier, stationed in Berlin. And sometime after that visit, they started writing each other until he was captured and put into a prisoner of war camp in Russia. He returned in 1945, and he came home, and they learned really very quickly things were not going to work out between them because John's mother was very selfish about her sharing with her son, and so they split up, and that's about all that my mom would really say about that. So this is a picture from my mother's one of her many albums. My mother was a great album scrapbooker, and it's because of that I'm able to put together a lot of this history. So I'm really grateful for all that she did in doing that. So soon after splitting up with John Haller, my mom met my dad, Gerd Fritz Ulbrich, at a dance in 1946 after he had arrived home from a Russian prisoner camp himself. He'd been captured there, and it took him almost a year to get home. He had to basically walk and work his way home from that Russian prison camp. And that was not untypical of a lot of the prisoners that made their way home. From what I've learned in history, not many prisoners came home from Russian prison camps either. So depending on when and where he was captured. there was a big difference. There was some in one camp there was quite a bit, but in another camp there were very few. It was like only 6 or 7% survived. So I'm not sure which camp my father was really at. One thing that Mom and Dad learned about each other when they first started dating was that they both attended the same elementary school in Kirchsteinbeck. So even though they were there at the same time, they never met each other and never really knew each other. From this picture album here, we can see that my dad was born on the March the 10th in 1926, and that he was born about 13 months after my mom, who was born on February 9th, 1925. So after dating for just 4 weeks, my dad told my mother that he was going to marry her, and he did. But they had to wait for 6 years before doing so. My dad and his family had experienced real hard times following World War II, as did most Germans. Dad didn't come home until nearly a year after the war was over. They thought he was dead as well, and so they were quite surprised to see him. But my family, the Ulbrich line, my dad had lost his father and his brother, both just 2 and 3 months before the war was over in May of 1945. So they died early in 1945, and it's a real loss because the war was already over. Hitler had already lost, but I think he was just making his preparations to escape Germany, and he needed all the time that he could before he attempted that. That's my personal belief. There's some historical fact that give evidence to the fact that he had many escape routes and that he really did not take those suicide pills, but that's beside the point. It was a tragedy for my family that both my grandfather and my uncle, whom I never met, were tragically killed just right before the war's end. So although it wasn't really recorded anywhere in family writings, I'm sure this was a very, very difficult time for them, and I'm presuming that my dad had to find work to help support his surviving family, which at that time would have been his mother, Anna Ulbrich, and his sister, Gretel Ulbrich. They were really the only two to survive the war, and because they had to kind of fend for themselves all during that war period, I'm sure things were pretty dire by the time Dad got home. So, the dating process probably wasn't the first and foremost thing that he had to take care of, and so I think that played a part in why this dating 6 years before they were married was so prolonged. This next picture here is a picture of both my mom and dad, and both are very, very dapper. I love that flowered dress of my mother on the right. She's standing in front of the Barch home. The Barch home had been bombed out when my mother was about 14. Came out of a bomb shelter. This was during this 7-day air raid of the English and the Americans, who had Operation Gomorrah, where they bombed Hamburg for 7 days and 7 nights straight, and really demolished about 80% of Hamburg, what was Hamburg, and including many homes, and that was my mother's home as well. So they lived in a dugout while they rebuilt, clean bricks, and rebuilt this home. And this is the house here on the right side. And I can see from this entrance here, from this picture here, and sometime just after the war, after they had it rebuilt, I can see that there's already been a lot of changes to the house, because there used to be an entrance right there standing behind my mother, and I just see a window there right now. But anyway, and my dad is standing out on the street. There's some bushes there before you get to the house, and he's looking pretty dapper, I must say. Just some pictures of them when they were dating, and clearly they were having a good time. This picture on the left-hand side has a little piece of paper pinned or tacked onto this railing right here. And according to Mom's notes in her album, it said that it said to be careful because there was fresh paint on there. So anyway, but I I look at these three pictures and it just kills me to look at this big frock of hair that my dad had. He would never ever let me get by with anything nearly so long all throughout my growing up years with him, and to see him with this massive hairdo is just hilarious to me. I can't even imagine it, but this big wavy hairdo that he had here on the right hand side. So this picture was taken from quite a distance, and I had to Photoshop it and blow it up quite a bit to kind of get a close up of this and be able to actually see some of the details. And it's interesting to me, not only this big frock hairdo, but this little dog right here looks like a little ducks hunt dog. And I think I remember briefly my dad saying they had a ducks hunt, but that may just be a poor recollection on my part. But I thought Mom looks exceptionally beautiful right there. And then here in the middle there on another bridge, Dad in his shorts, and obviously just having another great time. I found this in my mother's picture album. As one could see, she was quite smitten by my dad. And there's this heart. This looks like it was in 1947. At first I thought it was 1949 on the left, but if you look at that last digit there, I'm pretty sure that's actually a 7. It's more clear in the heart. Where it says 1947, Wir lernten uns kennen. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it's something about we got to know one another. Nice picture of the two of them. And I might just add that they were engaged about 3 years later, the next year. So my parents became engaged the day after Christmas on December 26 in 1948. Another contributing factor to the long dating period was that there simply was no housing available for a young couple anywhere in Hamburg. As I mentioned, most of Hamburg had been bombed out. There were no apartments, there were no free houses. So if a couple wanted to live by themselves and start off on their own life, there was simply nowhere to go. And so my dad ended up building a bungalow house just on the back property, in the rear part of the Barches property. They had a pretty nice plot of land, and so there was plenty of room for all these bird cages my grandfather had, and a workshop, and then this bungalow house that my dad built. And these pictures here we see in the upper left hand side, it looks like my dad's going up, and there's Uncle Billy, and there they are again in the middle picture. And then here we see my mom up there supposedly helping. Now what kind of help she was doing, I don't know, but there's this wreath, there's this pole and a wreath, and has something to do with a Richtfest. I don't know what that means exactly, but some sort of a celebration is, I guess, when they're raising the roof on this building. And here again is my dad and Uncle Billy. This is a really favorite picture of mine, showing my dad as he is in typical workers' clothing. When I would be visiting in Germany and watching the men walking home after work, after the 5 o'clock shift, the 8 to 5 shift, I would see them coming home, and many of them would be wearing this type of an outfit with a coat and a hat just like that. And so here's my dad wearing that. So it was kind of neat to see that. I'm also taken by that wheelbarrow in front, really old-fashioned, undoubtedly used to help move a lot of materials to the site from around to the back side of the Barches home. And here we can see this house was all constructed of brick and then with a stucco over it. And the picture to the right shows the back side of the house. So this is the opposite side from where my parents are standing. And the window on the far left of this house is probably no more than 400 square feet, and it really only had 3 rooms. On the left-hand side, with the fancy dorm type window, was the living room slash bedroom, and then in the middle here with a small window, that is the bathroom, and then on the far right is the kitchen. And there are many pictures of me as a baby up against this window here being bathed and so forth. So I was very fortunate that during my business trips there was one time when the house was unoccupied, and so I got to sleep in the and live in there for a few evenings on that business, and that was kind of a sweet thing to think of. This was, that I was sleeping in a house that my father had built. Unbeknownst to them, sorry about that, unbeknownst to them, they would only live in this house for about 2 years before moving to America. This picture here is in 1950, so roughly 3.5 to 4 years after they're married, and it's again, here's my dad with his big flock of hair, and but a beautiful couple, matching coats. Not sure where this picture was taken, if it was in my grandparents' house or not, or if it was somewhere else in Hamburg. Anyway, they were married on May 2nd, 1953. This is another favorite picture of mine. I think in particular because Dad looks so young here, and obviously they're both very, very happy, and it looks like my dad had his hair under better control on that day as well. But life was good. They had a house. They knew each other quite well after 6 years of dating, and my dad had a great job working for the government as a surveyor, so life was looking good. This is a marriage certificate that shows that they were married on that day, the 2nd of May, 1953. And of course it's in English, and you'll notice that this is actually was a certificate made on March 8th, 1962 in Salt Lake City, and signed by a notary public. So obviously he had taken a look at the German version and converted that to English. This was no doubt needed to become a U.S. citizen. So the upper part shows declares my dad's birth date and place, and the midsection is declaring the same for my mother. This picture was taken outside of the registrant's office, where young couples went to get their marriage license, and they would get all dressed up and have their pictures taken outside the door. And if I recall correctly, my mother said this was like the day before, or 2 or 3 days before, or something like that. But it's interesting to me that they would get all dressed up for this event just to get a marriage certificate. And I noticed from many other pictures in my mother's photo album where they had pictures of families and of other family members and friends of theirs that stood exactly behind or in front of this same door when they got registered, and they were all dressed up as well. I love Mom's beautiful bouquet and that fancy hat, which was indicative of the time, the double-breasted suit my father had, and just a really, really nice picture. It was indicative too, and you see this quite often too, when they got registered to be married, that you would always see attending family with them, and this is no exception. So you see here to the left of my mother, you see Uncle Billy, and to the right you see my Opa Barch. And I believe that they probably had to sign papers witnessing and authenticating who they were, and obliging the marriage itself. This picture is very endearing to me because it really represents the nucleus of my family in Germany. And I'd like to take just a few minutes to introduce them to you, beginning with my grandmother Ulbrich, or my Oma Ulbrich, as I called her throughout my life. She's the one standing right behind my my father here in the black dress with the necklace. And my Oma, she was a very elite and a very proper woman, and one in whom I dearly loved and highly respected. Just super, super classy woman. I always loved her when I was growing up, but when I went there on my business visits and got to meet with her and talk to her as an adult, I really gained a real appreciation for her fine character, just the amazing woman that she is. And standing to her right, or to the left of her, there is my Tante Gretel, my Aunt Gretel. We called her our Tante. And she too was a very elite and proper woman, and one whom I dearly loved and highly respected. She never married, and she just stayed with my Oma Ulbrich all her life, tending to her needs. As she grew older, my Oma Ulbrich had really thick lenses and was very, very much blind. She was. I'm pretty sure she was legally blind, even though she could still see. But it was very difficult for her to read or do very much, so she had to be taken care of in her later years. And most of the time, in fact, I even know her as a young child. So my Tante Gretel was just always there to take care of her. And when I would go visit when I was a young man and going on business trips, I would oftentimes stay with her. And Gretel was just such a delightful and gracious host, and we got along so well and just really grew to love and appreciate her. I had a very special relationship with her. Okay, so that finishes off the Ulbrich side, and now let's go to the Barch side. So on the far right side here is my Oma Martha Barch, called her Oma Barch. She was a doer and always busy. You rarely ever caught her just sitting around or doing nothing or just watching TV. She was also an awesome cook. Her goulash was epic. I just absolutely loved it, as I did everything that she ever cooked. It was just absolutely marvelous, and she always went way out of her way to make things very special for us whenever we came and visited from America. Being a skinny and scrawny kid as I was back then, she made it her mission to put on several pounds on me, because she felt I was too skinny and scrawny and it was unhealthy. So she would have me actually get on a weight scale every day or every other day to see if her mission to make me plump and fat was succeeding or not. Unlike now, when everything sticks to me, back then I was very active and it just never stuck, and so I was constantly disappointing her. So one day I thought, to do something nice, I saw this. She asked me to come in and weigh again. I was in the living room. She asked me to come into the family area, the family room, and I saw this statue, this heavy metal statue, sitting on top of this table, and I thought, man, that would be just awesome. So I picked it up, stuck it in the back of my pants, walked in, stood on the scale, and she saw that I had gone up in weight significantly, and she was just so pleased and so happy. And then I pulled it out of my pants and put it in her hands, and she just laughed, and we all laughed. And that was the last time I ever had to go stand on a scale again. Last time I visited with my Oma, I was an adult. I had been traveling overseas on business and stopped by Hamburg, and so I went by for a visit. She was very old and frail at the time. Her hair was stark white, and so a lot of the family was gathered on the back porch, and so I got to meet all of them while Oma Barch was getting herself ready, and then she finally came out, escorted by, I think, her daughter-in-law. And anyway, when she took her first step out and she took a look at me, she goes, "Boy, have you gotten really fat." And I think everybody in that room on the porch there, I think they were in shock. Their jaws dropped and probably terribly embarrassed. And I just laughed, and I said, "Well, Oma, I didn't want to disappoint you, so I put on a few pounds for you." And then I just went over and gave her a big hug and kiss, and everything was well, and we just had a wonderful visit. And it was really the last time I ever got to see her. So wonderful woman, and just very endearing. On the far left-hand side here is my Opa Barch. he was not the biological father to my mother. He actually married my Oma about 3 or so years, just a little over 3 years after my mother was born, and then he adopted both my mother and also my mother's younger sister, Agnes. And just a very, very nice man, very, very quiet. You hardly heard very much for him. The thing I remember most about him was he loved birds, and he built this huge bird cage that was maybe 60 feet long and about 10 feet wide and maybe 8 or 9 feet tall. And he had it sectioned off about every 6 feet. And there was an inside portion that was covered and kind of heated for the birds to be in, and then there was the outside part, and they kept them all separated so they wouldn't fight with one another. But he had some very rare and some very beautiful colored different birds, and he loved those birds. He would go there and he would feed them, and one of my favorite things was to go with him and go inside the cage and get out the special bird feed that he had, and then walk into each section and feed them, and they would come and they would just be so grateful, and you could see he had this real relationship with them, and they had no fear with him whatsoever. They knew they just loved each other, and he and my Oma, they would sit on the back porch oftentimes when they had their breakfast, lunch, and dinner meals, whenever it was nice weather outside, and they would sing. They would whistle and sing to the birds, and the birds would sing back, and it was just a marvelous thing to behold, and just so incredible. It was just a really special thing. My grandfather was also a very talented and skilled craftsman. He built these Shetland pony-sized carriages, and that would fit 2 people, and a little room in the back for, like your groceries and things like that, for taking Sunday strolls and so forth. And these were pieces of art, just absolutely beautiful. And it wasn't until many years later that I found out that he actually made multiple trips, and I remember him making some of these off to a scrapyard, and he would pick up old pieces of junk and bring it back and renew them and put them and build them into these carriages. So a lot of these buggies were actually built out of used parts, and then he would get brand new wood to make the railing, and he'd get nice leather to make the seats, and he would paint it all and sandblast it, and it would just look like brand new when he was done. And they were very popular. They always sold out before he was ever finished, and he was just exceptionally skilled that way. Amongst my favorite memories was at the Bartram was eating dinner in the evening, which was usually our bread, and we called it brochin time, where we had sandwiches and drinks, and we watched the evening news and soccer matches. And it was about the only time I ever heard my Opa Barch really get speak and get very excited, which usually happened especially during the soccer matches. One time when we visited, they just happened to be having the World Soccer matches, the World Soccer Cup, and it boiled down to between just Germany and arch rival England for the final match. And boy, was that an exciting time. We had lots of guests and neighbors over, and there was it was a grand time, and there was a lot of vocalization on that day, and it was hard not to get caught up in the spirit of it all. And there was a special player on the German team by the name of Gerd, just a rock star super soccer player, and phenomenal gifted player. And I remember him because his first name was the same as my dad's. Well, make long story short, Germany won, and you could have heard the hoops and hollers all across Germany. So it was just a very, very special times that we had together there with Opa Barch and the whole family. This next photo here, we have a larger group, and I'd like to spend just a few minutes kind of going over so you can see who they all are. I don't see Opa Barch on this, so I'm presuming he's the one who's taking the picture. On the far right, we see Oma Barch, and this lady who's dressed just like her and looks a lot like her happens to be her sister, Werner, and we called her Tante Werner, even though she was my mother's aunt. We kids called her Tante Werner, and And as you could tell, they both had similar appetites, similar shapes. And Tante Vanner, she was married to Uncle Willie, just right here on the far right side. And they lived just 2 houses over, just one house beyond this one that you see in the background. And so Angela and I would go over there all the time to visit them. They were just so much fun. And Tante Vanner was a phenomenal cook in her own right. She and Oma Barge, they were the best there ever was. And she was so giggly and lively and just so pleasant to be around, and just absolutely loved being with her. And Uncle Willie, he was a real character and a real jokester. He'd been an engineer in his life, and when I came over, he really sparked an interest in me to tearing things apart and seeing how they worked, and encouraged me and taught me how to put them back together. He had electrical switching gear, and he had old car parts. And so I was pulling them apart and putting them back together when I was like 8 years old, and I just absolutely loved doing it. In the meantime, he was telling us jokes and pranks, and just we were just laughing the whole time. And there was one time I'll never forget. He was telling us how I better learn my German, because if I wanted to make it to heaven, God spoke German, and so that was the only way you could make it to heaven. So I better learn my German. So that was words of wisdom from my Uncle Willie. This tall man in the very back right here, I have no knowledge of who that is. That's lost in time to memory. And this young girl just above my father, I have no idea who she is. The lady to the left there is Tante Gretel, who we spoke about, and the lady to her left is Tante Agnes. Tante Agnes was my mother's younger sister by about 1.5 years, and she was married twice, and I don't remember her last names anymore, but she had a young son named Klaus, and Klaus was, by all accounts, an extraordinary young man, very intelligent, very, very kind. He was such a pleasure to be around. He was always very, very busy, so I didn't get to spend a lot of time with him, but the little bit of time I did get to spend, he was so kind and so gracious to me, even though he was several years older. And unfortunately, he caught meningitis when he was 20 years old, and he died, and it was a great loss to not only Tante Agnes, but to the whole family, and I dearly miss him. To her left is my Oma Ulbrich, as we've already talked about. These two people that are immediately next to Oma here, I do not know, but I do know this lady right here happens to be my mother's godmother. That's all I really know. I'm presuming that this man happens to be the godmother's husband. That's just a guess on my part. And then on the far left side is Hilga, who is my Opa Barch's sister, and she would be over quite frequently when we were visiting and spend some time with us, and she was just a very, very kind, wonderful person. It was always a real pleasure to see her. Just as a matter of course of interest, this house right behind here to the right happens to be the Ostmeyer house, and the Ostmeyers had a young son named Günther, who was basically my mother's age, slightly younger, and so my mother and him kind of grew up together, and then after we Ulbrichs had settled in Salt Lake City after a few years, we sponsored Günther, and he moved in with us, and he stayed with us down in the basement for several years until he met Karma and got married to her and moved out to Colville. So I think that kind of covers this particular line here. This is another wonderful picture here of the time that of the wedding day, and I'm not sure where this picture was taken, but I think as I look at this, they just both look exceptionally sharp. I think that's one of the better pictures of my father, just and also my mother, just beautiful. And here again is another picture of the family. Just very near and dear to my heart. I don't know where this picture was taken, but I'm assuming that this might have been just outside the church where Mom and Dad were married, and just beautiful. And that's it. So I hope that you have enjoyed this as much as I have. I'm So grateful to have had a wonderful mother and father. They sacrificed a lot for me. I'll forever be grateful to them for the love and all the kindness that they gave to my sister and I. We never really lacked for anything. They were just wonderful parents, and so grateful for what they taught us and for the character they gave to us. And I wouldn't have wanted anybody else as my parents. So I hope that this was a little bit enlightening to you, to understand your heritage and kind of where your roots are from. Wonderful people, made lots of big sacrifices, saw a lot of big events in their lives, and had a lot of tragedy, but they sailed past through all of that, and are just great examples on the true pioneer spirit. And so I thank you for watching this, and look forward to more to come.